Welcome back, everybody. How in the heck are ya? Dana?
We're not cracking up when we came on for once.
Today we just got down to business.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we were talking about gaslighting and it's not funny. It's not a funny thing.
No,
Yeah.
and that's maybe why. And we're going to talk about gaslighting today, just because I think it's such a colloquial term that gets thrown around. Like everyone uses like, oh, don't gaslight me. I got gaslit. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just saying I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
So, of course it opened
Which
a
we
loop.
never heard it at all
Yeah.
before the whole Me Too thing. That now it sort of
Mhm.
has been folded. And like you said, people use it all the time. Yeah. Do you want to
Yeah,
read the
yeah.
definition or the origin?
Yeah, I was, of course, this opened a loop, like, where in the heck did this phrase or this word come from? Which is, I like to look at those things. That and the names of groups of animals, like, because they're so interesting, right? Like, it's like a gaggle of geese or a flamboyance of flamingos. Like,
Flamboyance, really? That's what it's
it's called a
called?
flamboyance.
Love that.
I
Love
know.
that.
Okay, so I'll read this. The etymology of the word gaslighting or gaslight came from a British thriller play from 1938 called Gaslight by Patrick Hamilton, that then was made into a film in 1940 called Gaslight, and then remade in 1944 in the US as a film called Gaslight. And the movie is about so I'm going to read this from Wiki. Set among London's elite during the Victorian era, it portrays a seemingly genteel husband using lies and manipulation to isolate his heiress wife and persuade her that she is mentally unwell so that he can steal from her.
Yeah.
That
So
is
it's like
where this term is from.
it's like being manipulated. Well, yeah, I always think of gaslighting as if you're saying something to somebody and there's gas that comes out of your mouth. I mean, that's the visual, and then they light a match, and so the idea, right, is to burn you with your own words or your own behavior. So they're
Ooh.
which is sort of like you're talking about here, like reframing someone's behavior in a way that pathologizes it or makes it like you're crazy or whatever. So the person then starts to doubt themselves, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the proverbial you shouldn't wear, if you don't want to get raped, you shouldn't be wearing a miniskirt. So that,
Yeah.
like, it's your fault, and the reframe that's really happened differently, and I think why this word has gotten so big in the lexicon with Me Too is wait a minute. For the longest time, there would always be that shred of, oh, okay, so I shouldn't dress provocatively. Maybe I do have something to do with it. So I better stop doing that. And it's putting this blame where it doesn't belong. Now we've been able to flip the narrative that's been there the whole time, but it always sort of blows my mind in my own process where I'm like, how come we didn't see it that way before? Like, how could that have been hidden in terms of what can men not control themselves to that degree that if someone's wearing a miniskirt, that's their green light to rape them? That sounds so ridiculous when you say it, but
Yeah.
those kinds of things weren't being said by the masses before. I mean, think of I'm going to date myself here, but the Jodie Foster movie,
Mm-hmm.
The Accused, I think, where she is gang raped and then goes to court, and they basically do what we're saying. They kind of blame her for it, and she doubts herself and so on. So there's always like an oppressed population is going to be more of a target for this sort of thing from the folks that are in power or whoever's in power. So like you see a lot of this in what you described in that description in that play or that movie. You see a lot of it in DV, domestic violence,
Yeah.
and just manipulation. We see a lot of societally, right? This whole thing going on around banning gender affirming care, for example, is just this kind of societal, governmental, if you will, repression of this thing, saying it's pathological and it's wrong. The neurodiversity movement saying we were talking before we went on, this is a normal biological variant to how humans can be because we're here. It's not a psychological disorder per se, but it's in the DSM, and so that a lot of people don't realize that it's like a that it's not psychologically driven, right? I would
Right.
say the average layperson out there still thinks autism has something to do with the parents and that kind of thing. That's like a form of gaslighting, right? Reframing and pushing you down and making what you're saying wrong somehow. Does that make
Yeah.
yeah, all kinds of fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this idea that, this person is pushing a narrative that is not real, or it doesn't feel real to the other person too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I see this, I mean, like I often hear about this in the dynamic when there's a narcissist, involved.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Which is, I've got a narrative about you. And there's some position of power in some way, shape, or form, right? That
mhm,
power
mhm.
exists. Kind of like even going back to bullying. I mean, we talked about
Yeah,
bullying as there's an inherent power differential or dynamic, right? But one person is constantly like negating the other person's perception of what their
yeah,
experience is and pushing this idea that you're wrong for saying that, there's something, that you're doing that you're irrational. So,
yeah,
I see this a lot when someone misbehaves, and
yeah,
any reasonable person would say you misbehave. And then
yeah.
when there is a reasonable reaction to their misbehavior, they say, see what you made me do?
Oh, yeah, yeah, so
See?
then you have to take the
That's
responsibility for the other person's
right.
behavior too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's where I really see like this gaslighting to be
yeah,
so interesting, but this kind of constant uh, communication that you're irrational, you're wrong, you're
yeah,
out of control, you're
yeah.
X,
Bad.
whatever that
Mhm.
is,
Yeah.
despite your perception.
My mind went straight to organized religion, so it's like this macro version of keeping people in line that way, like, in Christianity, this idea of original sin, you're born that way.
Yeah.
Also thinking of, as you were talking, the assumption that I did something wrong or, "Oh, crap, I'm in trouble," sort of this default that women get put into. My wife and I will joke about this all the time. I'm trying to think of something totally benign last week. Oh, I pressure washed our back patio,
Of
right?
course you
And then
did.
of course I did. And then I put a very large layer of mulch just outside our fence. And we have this big park that we all share. But I'm the only one that actually upkeeps our yard, of course, because, of course I do. Um,
Right.
and I we immediately get this email from our land management thing. Before I read it, I'm like, "Oh my god, someone reported me for, like, putting mulch outside the fence." I assumed my mind immediately went to, "I've done something wrong. I'm in
I'm
trouble.
in trouble.
I'm in trouble."
I'm
And
in
then so
trouble.
I say
I'm in
that to my
trouble.
wife, and she's like, she at first she looks at me and like, why would you think that?" And I was like, "'Cause I'm a woman." And then she's like, "Oh crap, there it is again." It's like this instant, "Don't worry, you don't have to push me down. I'll do it for you. I'm gonna assume." And how I got myself out of that was walking around the neighborhood the other day. I noticed someone, I don't get out as much without a dog, right? I used to see this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Their idea of suppressing the weeds, apparently, it must have been in the fall, was just put a bunch of flattened cardboard boxes under their bushes to like and they just look like they're rotting cardboard boxes. And I was like, okay, if no one's reported those people, I think beautifying mulch isn't going to be a problem. But it was this whole thing that came up in me. It was so automatic. I'm in trouble. I did something wrong. I'm going to take responsibility for it. And so I think that comes with just what you're talking about, being conditioned to say you're wrong, right? And sometimes those things are accurate. It always seems like whenever I'm arguing with an insurance company for a patient around something I've submitted, I'm never right. They're always right. I don't even
Oh, wow.
bother calling them anymore, right? So it is that idea of who has more power in the relationship, and yeah, to tell that person they're the one doing it wrong. That gaslighting. I don't
Yeah.
want to spank you. You made me do this. That with
Yep.
that example
I
that
was
you
gonna
gave,
say
it's
you
a
see
perfect
this a lot in
example.
parenting.
Yeah, yeah,
And where, we we're we need, I don't know, how do I say this without sounding so categorical, but
Mm,
like this idea of how do we help people be responsible for their own emotions?
yeah,
I mean, part of this is like, I can't handle my emotions. So guess what? They're coming back to you.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
because I can't handle myself. And I do see this like, and, parenting is a very difficult thing to do.
yeah.
And when parents themselves don't manage their own emotions, and especially the big
Mhm,
ones that come from parenting, because kids are a
mhm.
big stress,
It's a big yes, yeah.
and we're anxious about our kids. Like,
Yeah,
we care
yeah,
about our
of course.
kids, we're anxious about our kids. But man, when you don't manage your own stuff,
Yeah,
it very easily
yeah.
seeps into the parent-child dynamic in a
Oh, yeah.
very like, I'm doing this for your own good. I know better than you.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, you know, um, I mean, it's just kind of some of these narratives. And obviously that's from their own generational, their own cumulative lived experience,
Yeah.
their own
Mm.
history, their own. So, I'm not saying that this is that all parents are gaslighting their kids. I'm not saying that.
It's
But
just
I
a
am
right
saying
place for it to happen
it
if they adopt that style for sure, right?
marriage, I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of
Oh,
amplifies
yeah.
vulnerabilities, right? Like
Yeah,
that you
yeah, yeah.
have. And so, being with people is hard. And I'm not,
Yeah.
it's can be very rewarding work, but
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
not something that we just do without any kind of work.
That's a great example too within couples because I think that's a right ground for growing that too because people get defensive or whatever, and it really is a lot of hard work to do that with your spouse where you unwrap things and what is mine and what is yours and how do we tell the difference, right?
Yeah.
I was also thinking as you were talking the pervasiveness of those kinds of effects that it can have on children. I've talked in here. My mom's been gone for a long time. She was an alcoholic when I was growing up, and so she used to. And in hindsight, probably neurodivergent as well. But after, I won't give all the backfill, but there was a reason that either me or my sister on Tuesday nights would go out to dinner with her, and then she'd always want to linger in the bar, right? Here I am. What 14-year-old wants to hang out in the bar with her mom, right? So after dinner, I always be like, well, we're going to have one drink. And then, of course, it would turn into two or three or whatever. And I remember her saying that that wasn't bad enough, right? So I remember her saying, you're sitting here like, you don't want to be here and you're giving off like these hate vibes. So no one wants to talk to us. And did I go to a place that I would go to now, like your face is going to? No, I went to, "Oh, crap, what is wrong with me
Right.
that I'm doing that?" And, okay,
Right.
now to survive in this moment with this person who's clearly pathological, right? She's an alcoholic. I have to somehow deal with that. I internalize that I can't handle it, I can't do it the right way. And that was really something that I worked on in therapy, that theme of self-doubt. And
Yeah.
is anything you're doing okay? Or do you have to rethink it 6 million different times? And of course, my autistic brain did a good job at that, right? Spin, spin, spin. But I
Yeah.
still remember first time I told my therapist that story about how I used to have to do that. She had the same look on her face that you did. She was just like, wait, you had to do what?
Yeah. What?
And I was
That's
like, well, yeah.
completely inappropriate and unreasonable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had like 2 or 3 really good best friends in the neighborhood, and their parents were alcoholics too, so I just thought that's what parents did, you know?
Right.
My sister had to do it
Right.
every other Tuesday because we had to alternate. So that's a really good example of how it can be really pervasive over time, especially when
Yeah.
someone's in a developmental period of their life where they just
Yeah.
internalize it. And then it's like, I don't deserve this, or I'm wrong, or just that constant second guessing your own behavior, which
Yep.
autistics and neurodivergent people are already so good at anyway. And then you
Yeah.
throw a gaslighting person in there. Oh,
Yeah.
geez, the whole place is
Yeah.
going to blow up. It's a bad
Yeah.
recipe. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is a bad recipe. That is like it's inflammatory, right? It's
yeah, yeah.
all
Ah, boom,
right,
boom. Yeah, yeah,
right. Dun dun.
yeah,
Like it
yeah.
really is that. Dana, as we're talking about this, You and I have done episodes on bullying and imposter syndrome and self-doubt and and we jokingly said that, our new logo or image is going to be our head swirling down a drain,
The toilet.
because we were talking about, just our own where our minds can go, right? I'm curious, Dina, how did your management what was in the email in regards to your mulching and your was it
It had nothing to do with anything. I just saw that we got an email from
oh
the landman.
it had
I didn't even
nothing
open it. My immediate thing was to, oh crap, I just it didn't have anything to do with any of that. I think it
oh
was like they were gonna be cleaning the dryer vents or something. I mean, it was just
no
had nothing to do with it. Yeah.
it had nothing to do with like your actions at all,
No,
of
none
course.
whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Right.
that's like
Yeah.
that. And there is an adaptive sort of, I talk with clients about this with complex trauma, which certainly you could have if you get gaslit, especially growing up, right? And that's that idea of locus of control.
Yeah.
If your parent is the one that has all the power, that's a pretty, and they are hurting you, that's a pretty horrible thing for a kid to take in, right?
Yeah.
So blaming yourself gives you a little bit of, oh, my parent's not evil. It gives you that internal locus of the control. It's something I'm doing wrong. So there's a little bit of a weird sort of taking control that gives you a little bit of solace in a really weird maladaptive way. But it's what kids do that are being abused and those kinds of things. And so that becomes like a coping tactic. I'll take
Yeah.
responsibility for it. It's less scary than this thought of this random person being able to have all this power over me, right?
Right.
So me rushing to I did something wrong was an adaptive. Now, years of therapy, people who are listening to this might say, yeah, but you always talk about how you've had years of therapy. Why is that still happening? No, I recognize it now and I recognize it pretty quickly. It doesn't mean the initial switch doesn't still get flipped. It does. It gets flipped all the damn time. But it's like, oh crap, there it is again.
Uh,
I can recognize it now. Yeah.
I how does this make sense?
Yeah. Right.
We make things work for
Yeah,
ourselves.
exactly. Yeah.
And I think whenever we can reframe it in these ways, that form of self-compassion is
Mhm.
necessary to put us back right again so we can get back on our own feet,
Right.
like
Right.
um and I love that adaptive kind of just point of view on this, because when I think about trauma, especially early trauma,
Mhm.
right? And this is my way. This is my way of taking control of the situation. Fine, it's my fault.
Mhm.
Now I can punish myself.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
need to be open to the punishment of others, which can be unpredictable
Yeah.
in intensity, in duration, in its form, right? I'm going to sit in my own self-doubt and my own um loathing of
Yeah. Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Or and then you become hypervigilant. So you really try
Oh yeah.
to make
Oh
sure it
yeah.
doesn't happen again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a form of armor.
Yes.
Um
Yeah. Exactly.
that gets put up, and we do that because we need protection, and
Yeah.
that to me is sometimes some of the most heartbreaking things for me is like needing protection as a little child with your parent,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
And you're
happens
not aware you're doing that. So
no.
the reframe as an adult then becomes you can decide. So if you're aware of it, now you have some empowerment. We've talked about that a lot. And
Right.
you can decide what to do now. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dean, the other thing that I really appreciate that you said is, but Dina, you've been in so much therapy,
Yeah.
and it still happens to you. And it's like, it's because it's hard. It's wiring that's been laid down so early,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, right. I imagine like the old houses in which they've got that old knob and tube wiring, and it's like,
Yeah.
ooh,
Yeah.
how do we go in and rewire this place,
Yeah.
and update it? It's a mess.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what to cut. I don't know what to replace. I don't know if I do that, it has these cascading effects. And so it's
And
really about
it
like,
costs more to rip it all
totally.
out than to just leave it in and disconnect it, which is sort of like
Right.
that analogy too. It stays in there.
Right.
And every once in a while, someone can make it go on it.
react. Well,
Yeah,
we know that neuronally. We know
yeah.
that from a neuronal perspective that, the neurons that you forge, they don't go away. They
Right.
might get weaker and lay a little dormant, but they can be reactivated. I mean, this is why addiction is very difficult to manage. Um, right? And so that makes sense to me. But how do we create more space for
Yeah,
ourselves in order to separate ourselves from those from that early training that
yeah,
we kind of didn't even know about, right?
yeah.
So what does the work do? The work helps us create space and distance to
Right.
be observers in that so that we can say, wait. I'm an adult.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that anymore. I can make the choice to do this. But we do need space to do that when we've had that kind of history.
Yeah, and layers of privilege can really get in the way of that. So I'm thinking of like,
Yeah.
just men versus women, and there's a lot of things I see online to drive it home about, like memes that'll say something like, and these are addressed towards men, right? You should know that every single woman on planet Earth at one time or another has taken a different route home, or has held her keys in between her fingers,
Oh
or
yeah.
what, all those things. Where, and not that some men don't do that, but every single woman you've ever known, you've ever met, has done that at least one. Think about that, right? So the
Yep.
privilege is
Yep.
then for men that don't have that worry. And then how do you, as a person who has never had to deal with that, how do you get a version of empathy for them? And so, like when you said, it's this really happens with people have adopted that narcissistic personality as a way of moving through the world. They, in essence, are psychologically the privileged ones all the time. They can't see the marginalized point of view. They just can't, right? It's like
Yeah.
impossible for them. So it's really hard to put them in your shoes and say, don't be doing this to the other person. They're like, no, they're doing it to themselves and it has nothing to do with me. So there's all these layers that can be built into it to keep those structures in place, to make it hard for it to go away. And if you're not the one with all the privilege, you're always going to have those switches flipped. Like you said, the neural pathways are laid down so early, so pervasively. It's just a matter of laying down other ones next to it so that you can turn those on quicker than you ever used to, which is what I try to do
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the way that we work in the brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The brain is always going to default to the habit, the
Yep.
well-laid, concretized, quick
Mhm.
quick path.
Yep.
And until we build a path that is equally or more
Mhm.
convenient and
Yeah.
easier, the
Yep.
brain will always default to
Yep.
the easy path. And so I think this is another thing of like, familiar is
Mhm.
not the same as acceptable, right? If
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if an abusive environment is familiar to you and that's weirdly, it's not necessarily comfortable, but it's familiar. So the familiarity is comfortable because you
Yeah.
know what it is, right? It's not necessarily acceptable, but then we understand why people repeat patterns.
Of course. That makes total sense. They've been taught to
Right.
do that.
Right.
Exactly. Yep.
So, we don't typically like the new and the unknown and it's harder for the brain to function. It's doing a lot as it is. And so, it does default to those ways. And so all of
Mhm.
this to say, which is trust yourself and
Mhm.
surround yourself by people who get you and accept you and can offer you compassion, the space of self-compassion and
Yeah,
compassion.
try to do some reality
Um,
checking like I'll
yeah,
do with my wife. I'd be like, "Is this a thing or is this something else?" And it's like,
I
"No,
do
it's
that.
the gaslighting." Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do that. I gotta do it too, Dana. Like, am I off on this? Like, I'll say
Yeah.
that to some
You
people,
send me
like,
texts
wait,
where you're like, "Yeah, I'm off of this," and I'm like, "No."
right. Oh, I
Right?
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I mean, right. And I think that's a very healthy way of having some checks and balances, which is I reach out to someone that I respect and trust.
yeah,
And then I ask them this question to help me
yeah,
determine where I am on it just because I'm questioning it. Not
yeah,
because I feel like I'm wrong, but it's like I've got this kind of niggling feeling that,
yeah,
hey, is this what is this? And I know in psychology, we are really trained from an ethical, legal competency standpoint that whenever we have some of that stuff, we reach out to a colleague and we say, "Hey, I just like want to
Mhm.
run this by you." You know,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is still ethical for these reasons. What do you see? You know,
Yeah.
whatever, right? So this
Right.
is
Yeah.
we're really encouraged to do that in our field.
Yeah.
Whether we
I
all do it
really
or not, it's another question.
Yeah, I also encourage people that don't know if they're gaslighting somebody or just to get reality
Yes.
checks as well. Like I have a colleague I work with that calls them his blind spots in terms of
Yep.
his male privilege. And I appreciate when he comes and says, "Is this a thing?" You know,
Yeah,
to
it's
be
so
aware that
nice.
that could be happening. Yeah.
It's so nice. It's so nice to work with people who are like, "Wait, let me I have enough strength of vulnerability
Yeah.
to stand
Yeah.
back
And
and
I
ask
wanted
that
to,
question."
yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Cuz I do think that people who are able to be vulnerable are very strong. And I know
Oh,
that
yeah.
the
Yep.
sometimes we don't see those two things going together, but
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, everyone, on that on that serious note,
Don't gaslight people. Don't, yeah.
please don't.
Don't do
Please don't. Please take care of yourself.
it.
Please take care of yourself so that that's not necessary. All right. All right, everyone. We will catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Yeah. I